Hello guys, and welcome to this brand new lesson. In this video we are going to continue by creating and implementing the Note Systems functionality. Let's go to the scripts folder and let's create a brand new script which is going to be called Note. Alright, so let's go and let's create a brand new other script which is going to be called Page. So a note is going to be made out of different pages. So let's open up these two scripts. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to turn this class into a scriptable object. I also added this create asset menu attribute, and this will allow us to create this note scriptable object. Alright, so this class is going to be extremely simple. The only thing that we are going to add is going to be the label and the list of pages. So first of all, let's create a brand new serialized field, and this is going to be a string which we can call something like label. And let's create a public getter which is going to be a string, a label, and it will get and return the private variable. Alright, last thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new serialized field which is going to be the page array. Let's call this something like pages, and by default let's make this into an empty array, and let's create a getter, and that is all we need to do. So we are done with this class. So now let's jump into the page class and let's actually create our page. So first of all, this class needs to be derived from scriptable object. I also added this create asset menu attribute. Let's now remove both of these methods because we don't need them. And the first thing that we need to add is the page type. And we are going to have two types, the text type and the texture type. So let's first of all go and let's create a brand new enum. Let's create a public enum. And let's call this enum something like page type. And like I said, this is going to be only two types, the text and the texture. Alright, so now let's go and let's create a page type variable, and this is what we need to create. Then what we need to add is going to be the text, which is going to be a string. Alright, so I added a brand new variable which is simply just a text. I also added this text area attribute which simply just creates this text area in the inspector. I also added this getter, and that's all I did. So the next thing that we need to add is going to be the texture. So if our page type is the texture, then instead of the text we are going to use a texture. So let's create a brand new sprite variable, and this is what we need. And the next thing that we need to add is going to be the subscript. So first of all, let's create a brand new boolean to determine if we need to use the subscript. Alright, and this is what we need. So it is simply just a boolean which determines if we need to use the subscript. So if our page uses the subscript, then the text is going to be the subscript. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to determine if we need to display the lines. So let's create a brand new boolean, and this is what I added. So it's simply just a boolean, and I called it display lines. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to add some audio information. So let's create a brand new region, and let's call this audio. And the first thing that we need to add is going to be the audio clip of the narration. Of course, this is all up to you if you want to use that, and if you want to use that, then you have to make that narration yourself. We are going to add this test narration to kind of test if this is actually working. But if you want to add the proper narration, of course, it's completely up to you. Alright, so I added a brand new audio clip and I called it narration. Then what we need to do is we need to add a brand new boolean which will check if we need to play a narration once. Alright, so I added this brand new boolean which simply is narration play once. Alright, so the last thing that we need to add is going to be this boolean state. And this boolean state is going to determine if we already played the narration. Alright, so I added a brand new boolean state which I simply called narration played, and I also added the getter and the setter. Alright, and this is all we need to do within this class. So we have created a node and a page class. So let's go back to Unity. Alright, and now let's create a brand new C# script, which we will call nodes system. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new public struct, which we can call something like UI elements. And let's also make this struct to be serializable. First of all, let's include the system namespace. And then let's simply say that this struct is going to be serializable so that we can actually view this struct inside of the inspector. All right, and within this struct, we are going to include all of the node systems UI references. So I'm going to simply paste all of the references, and then I'm going to describe and show what kind of references added, so that you wouldn't have to check and see me adding all of the references one by one. Alright, so I just copy and pasted all of the references that we will need within this UI element struct. So first of all, as you can see, it complains. So we need to include a couple of namespaces, which is going to be using TextMesh Pro, as well as using Unity Engine.ui. Alright, so let's go one by one and let's see what I actually added. Alright, so the first reference that we have is going to be the text object, and the text object is the object where we're going to add all of the page text. The next one is the subscript, and the subscript is simply just a subscript text, and whenever we're going to view the subscript, we are going to put all of the subscript text inside of this text object. The next thing is the subscript canvas group. We're going to use this component to show and hide the subscript. The next thing is the image, which is the page. Alright, so the next reference is the image, which is the lines, and we are going to use this reference to show or hide the lines image, depending if the page needs to display the lines. The next thing is the node and list canvas group. Alright, so the next thing is the buttons, which is the read button, next button, previous button. So the next reference that we have is going to be the node data prefab. And the node data prefab is going to be the node data class that we need to reference. Of course, at the moment, we haven't actually created the node data class. So what we can actually do is we can simply just comment this reference out just until we actually implemented this class. The next thing is going to be the list rec transform. And the list rec transform is going to be used to update the height of the list. So whenever we're going to add new list elements, we are going to update the list, the content height, depending on how many elements we actually added. So let's go back into the node system class. And the first thing that we need to add is going to be the brand new serialized field, which is going to be the UI elements, and let's call this something like UI. Alright, so the next thing that we need to add is going to be the private static dictionary, and this is going to be the dictionary of all of the nodes. So let's simply say string, which is going to be the key, and the value is going to be the node, and we can call this something like nodes, and let's make this into a brand new dictionary. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a private static action, and this action will require the node argument that we need to send in also, and we can call this something like display. And by default, let's assign the empty delegate. Alright, so the next thing that we need to add, and this is going to be the array of the audio source. Well, first of all, let's add some space between elements, and let's add now a brand new serialized object, serialized field, which is going to be the private audio clip, and this audio clip is going to be for our open node sound effect. The next thing is going to be, of course, also the sound effect, which we will use whenever we're going to close the node. Alright, so let's add some space again, and the next thing is going to be also the serialized field, which is going to be the private list, or actually array of the audio clip, and let's call this something like turn page sound effects, and we are going to use these sound effects whenever we're going to turn the page. Alright, so before we add some other variables. Let's first of all add some regions. All right, and let's create a brand new region, which is going to be the properties and private. All right, so the first reference that we need to add is going to be the private node, which is going to be the active node. The next thing is going to be also private, and this is going to be the page property, which we can call something like active page, and we are going to use the getter to get the active page. But before we do that, let's create a brand new private integer, which is going to be the current page. And within this getter, what we are going to do is we're going to say return active node dot pages current page. All right, let's collapse this and let's add some more private variables. So another variable that we need to add is going to be the private boolean, and let's call this something like read subscript, and we are going to update this depending if we are actually viewing or not viewing the subscript. All right, so the next thing that we need to add is going to be the private sprite, and this is going to be the default page texture, and the very last thing that we need to add is going to be the private boolean, and this is going to be something like using nodes system. All right, so let's go back to data and actions, and let's add a couple of more variables. So let's create a brand new serialized field, and this is going to be the color, which we can call something like color1, and by default let's put it to color.gray. And let's create a brand new other color, which is going to be the color2, and these colors are going to be used whenever we're going to create the list element. All right, and the very last thing that we actually need to also add is going to be the list of node datas. So we're going to keep track of all of the node datas, so all of the list elements. Of course, currently we don't have the node data class, so we are going to add this reference a bit later. So the first method that we need is going to be the private void, which is going to be on enable, as well as private void on disable. We are also going to need private void start and private void update. All right, so for now there's not much we can actually do within these methods, so let's simply collapse this and let's implement some more other methods. So the first method that we need to implement is going to be the public void, and we can call this something like open. Right, so the first thing that we need to do whenever we're going to open the node system is removing all of the character and game control. What I'm going to show you is going to be a really cheap and easy way of disabling the game control, but of course if you're actually creating a proper game, then you should of course figure out of the better way and the proper way of disabling the game control. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to say unity engine dot object dot find object of type, and what we need to find is going to be the unity standard assets dot characters dot first person controller, and let's simply say enabled equals to false. All right, and now what we need to do is we need to say that the cursor dot visible is going to be equals to true, and the cursor dot log state is going to be equals to none. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the list. All right, so let's implement this brand new method, and within this method the first thing that we need to do is we need to clear the list. Let's implement this method as well, and before we can actually move on with these methods, what we need to do first is we need to create the node data class. So let's simply go back to Unity and let's create a brand new C# script which is going to be called node data. So the first thing that we need to add within this class is going to be the well, first of all we need to include a brand new namespace which is going to be using Unity engine.ui, and the very first reference that we need to include within this class is going to be the serialized field image, and this is going to be the background image. The next thing that we need to include is going to be the label. For that, we need to include a brand new namespace, which is going to be TextMesh Pro. So now we can actually go and we can say serialized field TextMesh Pro UGY, and we can call this something like a label. All right, so what we need to do now is we need to implement a couple of private variables. The first one is going to be the private node. The other one is going to be the private rec transform, and we can call this something like rec. Alright, so then let's create a brand new public rec transform, and this is going to be the rec, and this is going to be the getter that will first of all, it will check if the private rec is equals to null. What we're actually going to do is we're going to say rec equals to get component rec transform. So if this rec is equals to null, what we are going to do first is we are going to try to get the component, and if a rec is still null, then what we need to do is we need to say that rec is going to be equals to GameObject.add component, and we are going to add the rec transform component onto this GameObject. And of course, afterwards, we are simply going to return the private variable. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to create a brand new public method, which is going to be called something like update info. And as a parameter, what we need to send in is going to be the node as well as the color. What we're going to do within this method is simply update the information within this class. So let's simply say this dot node is going to be equals to a node. Then we need to say that the label dot text is going to be equals to a node dot label, and background image dot color is going to be equals to the color that we send in as a parameter. And that is all we need to do within this method. So the next method that we need to also implement is going to be the public void, and this method is going to be called display. And within this method, we are simply going to display the node. Of course, currently we do not have the proper methods to handle this functionality. Alright, and this is all we need to do within this class. Obviously, we are going to update this method, but we are going to do that a bit later. So let's go back to our node system. Alright, so because we created a node data class, the first thing that we need to do is inside of the UI elements struct, let's simply uncomment this reference, which is the node data prefab. So let's simply uncomment this reference. Alright, and what we need to do now is we need to go back to our node system, and let's create a brand new private list. And this list is going to be the list of node data. So we are going to keep track of all of the list elements. What we are going to do is we are going to create a for each loop, and we are going to loop through the node data's list, and we are going to destroy all of the node game objects. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to say that node data's dot clear. Of course, there are much better ways in handling this thing, instead of constantly destroying all of the current elements and then spawning a brand new list. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to go back to the update list method, and after we cleared the list, what we need to do first is going to be, first of all, creating a brand new variable, and this is going to be the index, and by default let's put it to 0. Alright, so afterwards let's create another variable which we can call something like height, and afterwards let's create a for each loop, and we are going to iterate for all of the nodes. And the first thing that we're going to do within this for each loop is we are going to create a brand new variable which is going to be the color. And what we're going to do is we are going to use these color 1 and color 2 values, and we are going to use color 1 if the index is even, and we are going to use color 2 if the index value is an odd value. So we are going to determine that by saying if index. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the modulus operator, and this operator simply returns the division remainder. And if the remainder is equals to 0, that will mean that the number is even, and we are going to use the color 1. And if the remainder is not equals to 0, and we are going to use then the color 2. Alright, so once we actually have the color, what we need to do now is we need to create a brand new variable, and this is going to be the new node prefab, and it's going to be equals to instantiate a UI.node data prefab, and the parent of this new node prefab is going to be the UI.list rectangle. Alright, what we need to do then is we need to say that the node datas.add, and we are going to add this new data prefab. Alright, and afterwards let's simply say that the new node prefab dot update information. Let's call this a method, and as a parameter we need to send in the node, simply just a node, which is the element in the dictionary, and the color is going to be the color. Alright, so once we created and updated this new data prefab object, the next thing that we need to do is we need to say that the new data prefab dot rec dot anchored position is going to be equals to a new vector 2, and for the x position let's simply use 0, and for the y position let's use the height. Alright. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the height value. So let's simply say the height is going to be minus equals a node data prefab, or simply just a node new node prefab dot size dot rec dot size delta dot y, which is simply just the height of the node prefab. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to update the list height. So let's simply say UI.list list rec dot size delta is going to be equals to a new vector 2, and for the x position we are simply going to say UI.list rec dot size delta dot x, so the default width of this element. And for the height of this list, what we are actually going to use is going to be the height multiplied by -1. Alright, and the very last thing that we need to do is we need to say that the index is going to be +1. And this is all we need to do to update the list.